Hi, sharks. It's Marlin, and I'm going to read Chapter 2 of The Littles. The day after Henry Bigg's birthday party, the Littles were together in their living room. Granny Little was in her rocking chair. She was knitting something that she'd been working on for weeks. Nobody knew what it was. Granny Little was keeping it a secret. Whatever it was big. Uncle Pete, cane in hand, was limping back and forth in front of the fireplace. Uncle Pete had been wounded in the mouse invasion of 35. He always clumped his cane loudly when he walked. Granny, he said, for weeks you have been knitting on that what-do-you-call-it. When are we going to find out what it is? When the time comes, Peter Little, said Granny Little, and not a moment before. Where's Dad? Said Tom Little. Tom was standing on his head in the corner of the room. Your father's been on the roof ever since the wind began blowing from the east, said Mrs. Little. Tom somersaulted to a sitting position. Is Cousin Dinky coming? I wouldn't be surprised, said Mrs. Little. He's been in the east for weeks, and the wind is finally blowing this way again. Oh, goody, Lucy clapped her hands. I love it when Cousin Dinky comes. I hope that he's been to Tina Small's house. She owes me a letter. Cousin Dinky Little was Mr. Little's adventurous nephew. He had been all over and seen everything. He knew all the tiny people in the Big Valley. Cousin Dinky was the only person in the Big Valley to travel from house to house. The others were afraid to go too far away from their homes. It was dangerous. The nearest family to the Littles were the Smalls. A trip to the Smalls would take a whole day. There was danger every step of the way. They had to cross a road and get over a brook. There were animals everywhere. Tiny families like the Littles, the Fines, the Smalls, the Crumbs, the Shorts, the Buttons, and all their kith and kin lived all over the Big Valley, but they never got together. There was one thing, however, that gave them a feeling of belonging to each other. It was Cousin Dinky Little. Cousin Dinky had visited every family at least twice. He had seen some of the families many times. Whenever Cousin Dinky went, he would tell the news of the other tiny people he had met in his travels. Through Cousin Dinky, many people who had never met got to know one another. Someone was always giving Cousin Dinky a letter to carry to a friend. His pockets were stuffed with letters. Some of them weren't delivered for months, but nobody cared. They thought they were lucky to get letters delivered at all. When Cousin Dinky first began his life of travel and adventure, he walked everywhere. He soon grew tired of that. The danger didn't bother him. In fact, he liked danger. But walking so slow, Cousin Dinky wanted to go everywhere fast, so he built a glider. He built the best glider he knew how. Then he practiced flying off the Big's roof. He had a few crashes and he got a few scratches and bumps, but at last he became an expert glider pilot. On still, calm days, Cousin Dinky stayed put. Whenever the wind blew, he flew, and he always flew in the direction of the wind. Cousin Dinky would glide with the wind until he came to a house where a tiny family lived. Then he would land and stay with them until the next windy day. As soon as the wind shook the trees, Cousin Dinky would be off again. He'd look at his map, check the wind, and the direction he decided where he would go by which way the wind was going. No matter what direction the wind blew, Cousin Dinky knew a tiny family was waiting for him. Isn't it wonderful how Cousin Dinky gets to meet all the tiny people, said Lucy. I wish I were Cousin Dinky, said Tom. Well, I don't wish you were Cousin Dinky, Mrs. Little said. Your cousin lives a very dangerous life. I was a lot like Dinky Little when I was younger, said Uncle Pete. He looked at himself in the mirror over the fireplace. He takes after me, don't you think? I wish Cousin Dinky would teach me how to fly, Tom said. Maybe I'll ask him if he comes. We'll hear no more of that, if you please, Tom, said Mrs. Little. It's dangerous enough that you ride all over on the back of the Big's cat. Every time you go out on that cat, I hold my breath until you come back. Hildy's my friend, said Tom. When I'm with her, I'm safer than when I'm home. Please, said Mrs. Little, you're only 10 years old. You don't know what you're saying. Oh, but he does, Mother, said Lucy. He does. Lucy rushed to her mother and hugged her. Staying home all the time is terrible. Cousin Dinky knows everyone. He has friends everywhere. And we're stuck in this house. Lucy began to cry. Why? Tina Small is probably my best friend, and I've never even seen her. Uncle Pete limped over to Lucy. He patted her on the back. No tears, my dear, he said. You know my rule. No tears in front of your uncle. He laughed hard at Mrs. Little and said, for goodness sake, you have to say something nice to her. Tell her what we're having for dessert tonight. How can I do that? Said Mrs. Little. You know as well as I do that we eat what the Bigs eat, and I have no idea what Mrs. Big is planning for supper. She gave Lucy a hug and a kiss. So, friends, this story is kind of interesting for us right now because the littles, they're stuck in their house because they're little. And we're stuck in our house to keep us all safe from the virus and to keep people that we love safe from the virus. So it's an interesting question to see what's going to happen next for the littles and what's going to happen for all of us next. You're nice and safe with your parents and maybe some grandparents and your brothers and sisters if you have some. If you want to talk to anybody about staying at home, you can talk to your mommy and your daddy, or Miss Jessica or Miss Holly, or I would also be glad to talk to you anytime. So I'll see you soon for chapter 3.